over to today's instructors, Ryan Bissegger and Paul Martin.
Excellent. Thanks, Dustin. We started with a bang. So in the chat, Dustin, there is a mention that the hyperlink that you provided with the course materials, somehow that link is bad. So if you could take a look at that again. I did a quick test and got the 404 message as well.
Okay, I will get that fixed for y'all. Sorry about that.
No problem. So then, good morning, everyone. As Dustin mentioned, this is the grant training program led by Mark Thomas from Ryan Bissegger and I, the positioning for successful grant applications. On the next slide, we have a little bit of our bios of the two course instructors. So myself as Paul Martin, I have both public and private sector experience working as an active transportation coordinator and focusing in transportation planning and active transportation topic, now back in the private sector after working at a regional agency and a local agency. I'm actually in the Orange County area in Southern California and have a lot of work throughout Orange County on various things shown on the screen, as well as Los Angeles County. But personally, I really enjoy the private sector work as an opportunity to travel the state. So whether I'm doing work in Humboldt County, the Sacramento region, or for example, in the town of Paradise, helping out with the recovery for the community there. So we're going to be drawing on a lot of experiences from our work experience and things that we've seen. So we'll talk about some of those as we go. With that, I'll hand it off to Ryan for his bio as well.
Hi, good morning. My name is Ryan Bissegger. So I lead Mark Thomas's grant funding pursuits and positioning efforts. I've been in the industry for 18 years, and I've prepared grant applications for regional programs, statewide programs, national programs, the federal discretionary grants. So my experience in grant funding and positioning work really covers the gamut of transportation programs. And something I'm really proud about was in 2020, right? That was the last big funding year before this year. And I led applications statewide that secured $111 million in competitive grant funding. So that was something as myself and as a company, we're very, very proud of, as that was a big effort that really helped our agency clients be able to implement projects. So today there are a number of resources that are going to be provided. This is what the chat has been about and that Dustin posted. So there's a handout, and that includes some really helpful links and guidance and policy documents, right? It includes links to each of the programs we talk about, different state and federal policies, and some acronyms, which is really important because if most of us probably know in transportation, there is a whole lot of acronyms for just about anything, and it can be overwhelming. And so that is a really helpful guide to use. The recording of the presentation will be made available for later viewing. And lastly, the copy of the PowerPoint presentation that has also been provided to everyone as well. So you can have that handy at your disposal after the fact. Well, when Paul and I were coming up with this course, we developed this, overall course objective first, and that is a training program oriented towards public agency staff to learn how to best position transportation programs for grant funding, right? We really wanted to help agencies to be able to understand the whole range of funding opportunities out there and how to best position your projects and programs to go after and secure grant funding, as we're seeing more and more opportunities for competitive grants, not just at the state level, right, but also at the federal level. And we'll be going into some of those later in our presentation. But we really encourage this course to be interactive, and if you have questions, please type them into the chat. We pause during the presentation to respond directly to those questions and provide answers. And, in those instances where we don't have the answer right handy, we turn around and come back during the breaks and we'll provide those answers directly back into the chat or address them to the group. And then we'll also be having a number of interactive polls throughout just to kind of gauge the experience of individuals attending the presentations the next 2 days. No, our course criteria, we've broken it into the 2 days, right? So 4 hours approximately today, or 4 hours today and another 4 hours tomorrow. Today, we are going to go over, this broad understanding of the competitive grant funding programs at the regional, state, and federal levels. We're going to talk about the impacts of federal funding on your project and what that means. Paul will go through the environmental status briefly. Some on here may know it better than us, which is great. So, Paul is going to give a high-level overview of CEQA and NEPA. I'm going to talk about impacts to the state right-of-way, right? Many times, agencies are leading projects either at an interchange or perhaps the Caltrans highway serves as your main street in your community. And so there's times where the local agencies will implement improvements on the state system, and we'll go through that. Paul will go through how we develop a really strong project description that best describes what the project is and its benefits. He will also go into identifying underserved communities and the various definitions for those. And then lastly, today, I'll go through identifying the funding needs of a project and showing multiple case studies about how we've done that. Tomorrow, we are going to discuss, Paul is going to discuss specifically how we match projects with the appropriate program, and also go a little bit into what we're seeing a lot of right now at both a regional level and a local agency level, which is bundling of project improvements. Paul is also going to talk about community engagement and the importance of that within grant applications. Paul's done a lot of community engagement in his career, and he's got some great things that he'll talk about. I'll go into how we go and discuss advanced dialogue with funding agencies. This is something we've done a fair amount of recently, particularly at the state level, and I'll go into an example there. I'll also describe communication as storytelling, right? How can we best tell the story of your project or of a project towards a grant program? Paul will discuss how to develop compelling graphics that support the grant narrative and really strengthen the story of the project. He will also go into securing letters of support, not just from other agencies, right, but from community-based organizations as well. And lastly, we'll close out with me talking about the various political trends and evolving policies that impact transportation funding decisions. And if anybody has prepared or just finished preparing an active transportation program application, you saw in their discussions of community displacement and pro-housing designation. And so we'll go a little bit into those as well. Well, first thing off here is we are going to have our first poll. So we just want to know, who's here with us in our training these next 2 days? What is your role in your organization? Are you part of planning? Are you in engineering? Maybe you primarily are in construction. Maybe your job is grant writing or programming. And then lastly, the other. And those maybe who are other, if you wouldn't mind just dropping in the chat what your position in your organization is, just, that'll really help us to understand everyone that we're dealing with here today in the training. All right, thank you, Joel. Other management, which includes grants. Fantastic. Community and economic development. Thank you. Grant specialist, Doreen. Thank you. We're still getting a couple of trickling in. Oh, Todd, thank you. All right, I appreciate everyone dropping in the chat. It's great seeing what everybody does for your organization when it comes to grants. And I'll go ahead and close our poll. And let's share these results. So with us today, the biggest group of the 87 who are here today is engineering at 36%, followed by planning, which is about a quarter of individuals, then grant writing at 17%, programming at 11%, and the other, which everybody's been sharing, which is fantastic, at 12%. All right, moving along here into our first module, which is understanding competitive funding sources. And this is going to be a pretty large topic just because there are so many funding sources that are out there. And I'm going to go through a portion of them. I know there's some that I did not include in the grant in the training, but I'm happy to talk about those as well offline. But first, let's go ahead and do our next poll, which is, how familiar is everyone here with competitive grant funding? Are you learning today for the first time and you're brand new? Maybe you've got some experience with different programs and topics and you got a little bit of knowledge. And then lastly, man, you are an expert and you could take and teach this course instead of Paul and I, which is fantastic. There's so much to learn with grant funding. And so I think, anyone can benefit from this course regardless of where you are in your experience level. Let's wait a couple of minutes here as the poll. And I'll go ahead and close out our poll. And let's take a look here at the results. 3/4 of individuals, so 75%. A few sources and you're going to get to learn a whole lot more here shortly. 18% you're learning for the first time today, which is awesome. Congratulations. And then lastly, 7% of you could really teach this topic, which is great. Like I said. So I'll stop sharing the poll and we'll jump in. So for understanding competitive sources, we're going to go through in 3 levels. We're going to talk about regional programs, then we'll get into the state programs, and then lastly in the federal programs. And I have broken these out by who the granting agency is and not necessarily the color of money. And for instance, we were going to talk about the Highway Safety Improvement Program. And while that is has traditionally been a federally funded program, we're going to talk about it in the state programs because the state Caltrans is the granting agency. First, we're going to go with the regional programs and the sales tax measures. So across the state, there are, 20 some odd counties that have implemented half-cent or quarter cent, or in Monterey, I think it's like 3/8 of a cent sales tax that funds specifically transportation projects. And this is voted on by the public and must meet a 2/3 threshold except for in a couple of instances now where in Sacramento County specifically, there is a citizens measure, which is going to take a 50% plus one threshold to pass. So there's some nuances there. And if somebody has questions about that, I'm happy to talk about that offline. What's the benefit of these sales tax measures for the counties is that the money collected locally stays locally, right? And it's all, the big push is on promises made and promises kept. And these programs really range depending on the size of the populace in the county and the sales taxes collected. So we have programs that, for instance, like in Madera County, the old Measure T, that was about 200 million in revenues versus like a county like LA, where the recently passed Measure M is 120 billion, right? So it really can span a big gap. Just depends on the differences in the county. For the most part, these funds are distributed to projects based upon expenditure plans. However, many of these taxing agencies have started to implement competitive grant applications, right? So those who might be in Orange County, OCTA implements a call for projects annually for Measure M2 monies. And then another example would be in San Joaquin County, where they have had a couple of rounds of Measure K funding that has gone towards active transportation and smart growth projects, right? So you get a little bit of everything there with these sales tax measures. Next regional program is the CMAQ, or Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality. And these are funds that are sub-allocated by counties and to counties and programmed by the regional agencies. And the funds only are available to counties that are an air quality non-attainment, right? So not every county in California receives CMAQ funding. I think there are some up along the North Coast that they do not have air quality non-attainment issues, and so they do not receive CMAQ funding. The intent of these funds are to reduce congestion and improve air quality, just as the name says. And those projects include, roundabouts, intersections, signalizations, multi-use paths, bike lanes, pedestrian facilities, projects of that nature. They do require an 11.47% local match. And the regional agencies really have some flexibility on how those funds are allocated, right? They could be through these competitive funding programs, and I'll go through some of those examples later, or they could be made by other decisions by the county transportation board. So there is some flexibility, and that's the intent of those programs, is to give regional control to transportation decisions. Next is the Surface Transportation Block Grant, or what had previously been known as the Regional Surface Transportation Program, or RSTP. This is one of the most flexible programs in transportation funding. It is similar to the CMAQ, where funds are sub-allocated to counties and then programmed by the regional agencies. In the regional agencies, again, there's flexibility on how these funds are allocated, right? I've seen many different ways, whether it's a competitive program or it's based on, maybe the allocation is based on road miles or lane miles, right? To agencies, it really just depends on how the agency wants to implement that within the FHWA rules. And lastly, again, it does require an 11.47% match for those funds. Next, and this is our largest transportation program in the state, and this is the State Transportation Improvement Program. It is comprised of two subsets, and those are the Regional Transportation Improvement Program, or RTIP. I've heard it sometimes called the RIP, which is Regional Improvement Program. That it's comprised of 75% of all the STIP funds. And that 75% of the overall STIP funds is distributed to counties based on two formulas. I think Southern California is based upon population, and Northern California, I believe, is based upon lane miles. I could be incorrect. And so, but I'll make sure to drop into the chat during the break of exactly how that is distributed. And then the 25% that stays with the state, that goes to the Interregional Transportation Improvement Program, or ITIP. And, that 75% that goes to all the counties, it's a lot of flexibility on how those funds are allocated. Right, these counties really get the decision on how those are used. A PSR, or project study report, is required in order to receive STIP funds. We are currently going through a couple of projects right now where we are almost done, actually, with final design plans, and we have had because we're getting STIP funding now, we need to go back and prepare a project study report for compliance with STIP funds. And then lastly, this program is adopted every even year. Well, I mentioned I was going to provide some examples at the regional level, of different competitive programs. If you are in the Bay Area, you are familiar with MTC's, or Metropolitan Transportation Commission's One Bay Area Grant, or OBAG. That is how the CMAQ and STBG funds are allocated to agencies in the Bay Area. In Sacramento, SACOG uses the Regional and Community Design Programs. That is how STIP, CMAQ, and STBG funds are distributed across their region. And then lastly, if you're down in San Diego, there is the Transnet Smart Growth Incentive Program by SANDAG. Right? These are just examples, not all of them, but many of these regional programs that use either their measure program funds or their regional funding programs the other programs that we just talked about. Next, we're going to get into the statewide programs, and Paul is going to cover a couple here real quick.
So I just want to take a minute and talk about the ATP. Ryan and I both have focused a lot on this, but to give Ryan a little break so he can have a little drink of water. The state program that many of you probably were involved in recently, the Active Transportation Program, is a funding program that runs essentially every 2 years. We just had a deadline on June 15, so many agencies throughout the state had submitted grant applications. This really funds, the text says construction of non-motorized improvements and non-infrastructure components. Generally, I'll just talk about it as active transportation for people walking and cycling and other rolling mechanisms. So infrastructure projects as well as non-infrastructure, and we'll talk more about that. What is non-infrastructure, some sort of programming activities as we go through the course today and tomorrow. This is a combination of both state and federal funds. So there is a possibility of having federalized funding and needing to have environmental review from a federal perspective. And then the funding program gets broken into 3 buckets as shown here. So 50% in this first bite at the apple for the statewide competition. The highest scoring projects will get some of that funding, that 50%. And then for the rest of the state, we've got these two other categories. The small urban and rural communities have a dedicated pot of 10%, and then the largest MPOs within the state get another 40%. And it's primarily a population-based item. So everyone has two chances at getting the funding based on where their scoring is. And then the legislation says explicitly that 25% of the funding at least has to go towards disadvantaged communities. Matching funds are not required, but there is some benefit in some of the scoring criteria. The active transportation program is a mixture of qualitative and quantitative information. There's a lot of storytelling. There's a lot of written narrative that has to go into answering the active transportation program questions. Whereas our next funding program, the Highway Safety Improvement Program, shown here, this one is much more quantitative, right? So this HSIP program has been around for some time. Cycle 11 applications are due in September, is shown on the last bullet there. And the HSIP is much more of an engineering solutions item. We've got crash history. We need to address it with this safety countermeasure, some engineering solution. We've got the volume of crashes that can be corrected by this item, and we can show it through this analysis. They've got a dedicated PDF that runs through the analysis called the HSIP analyzer. There also are set-asides in the HSIP program for the items that are shown on the screen here. And then again, the matching funds vary. So you see a little bit of variety between those two. Sometimes strategically, it's important or useful for an agency to say, what is the best type of funding source that I can go after? You might be able to incorporate active transportation improvements in your HSIP applications if the crash history is there. Whereas that active transportation program, you might also draw on other criteria beyond crash history, propensity of activity, key demand, the benefit of the nexus with connections to various land uses and housing, for example. So there's a mixture of different things that go into both of these funding programs, but it's helpful for everyone to have them on their radar. All right, back to you, Ryan.
All right, thanks, Paul. And the one thing I will add just briefly here on the HSIP is they did add an additional set aside this program for bike lanes, both bike lane, like a traditional class 2 bike lane, as well as separated bike lanes. It's a pretty small set aside. I think it's $250,000 per agency. And also that unfortunately right now, if you haven't already prepared your LRSP with Caltrans money, they are not accepting applications for new LRSPs right now.
And we'll get into the LRSP. There's some other slides about that a little bit, but if anyone's not sure what that is, we'll talk that acronym through a bit too.
Yes, local roadway safety plan. Next at the statewide program is the SHOP, or the State Highway Operation and Protection Program. Larry, just one second. We will get to your question. So the SHOP is primarily, those are state highway system funds that are controlled by Caltrans. They go towards pavement rehabilitation, safety, operational improvements, complete streets. Maybe it's bridge rehabilitation as well on the state highway system, right? The state routes, interstates, and US highways within California. This is adopted every even year. So they did just adopt the SHOP program earlier this year. And there is, the projects are selected at a district level for the SHOP. And there's a subset of the SHOP funds called the minor program, and that provides the districts with flexibility to work with local agencies to implement improvements on the state highway system. So we have a couple of projects that we're working on that the agencies have received SHOP minor funds, to help improve or to help deliver projects on the state highway system. So to get back to Larry's question in the chat, thank you, Larry. Can we explain how the set aside works? Sure. So for the last several HSIP cycles, Caltrans has set aside a certain dollar amount for particular types of improvements, right? So if we go back a slide here, they have set asides for guardrail repair and installation. There are set asides for pedestrian crossing improvements, edge lines on the roadway. I described the bike lanes, the new one, and then there's a tribal set aside. And there's instructions from the HSIP that you do not need to prepare a benefit cost ratio for them. So, it is a simpler application to go after, and one where you have a higher opportunity of success potentially in order to secure those funds. And we've worked with some agencies in the past to we have a corridor project we're doing in the North Bay, where we have this project, and when the last HSIP cycle came around, we worked with the agency to identify some pedestrian crossing improvements that could be split off and funded with the HSIP. So we were able to bring in $250,000, which was the max, in order to deliver those crossing improvements as part of the larger project. Next question in the chat from Devin. For LRSP and HSIP funding, would a local agency Vision Zero plan meet the requirement? There is a self-certification of the LRSP for the HSIP, and I'll have to look at that to see what exactly is included. I don't know, Paul, if you know offhand. But we can look at that during the break, Devin, and get back to you with what would need to be included within that Vision Zero plan for it to qualify as a local roadway or a local roadway safety plan.
I feel like this came up with someone, and I think actually it'd be interesting. I don't know if anyone's available from the HSIP program, but generally in some correspondence we've had with the HSIP team, I would say this is the first time with HSIP with cycle 11 where an LRSP, a local roadway safety plan, is required. And I think there's a higher degree of flexibility with what quality document, what type of document your local agency has, if it satisfies the degree of analysis, you've got prioritization, that you've evaluated crash history, those types of things that are aligned with what the intent and the goal of a local roadway safety plan is. It's just not titled in the same way. Having a stakeholder working group participate, or multiple people from different representations and disciplines, is important as well. So it may be a bit of a discussion with some of the HSIP team about if your document is eligible or not. There's not a hard and fast requirement. And I know also I feel like I've heard some degree of flexibility, and the agencies either have to have their local roadway safety plan fully completed or substantially completed or started. So I've heard a few different things. I think the intent is just to help nudge agencies with getting their document created, and a Vision Zero plan probably would show that intent in a good way. So hopefully that helps. And then I do have, Ryan, there was a little bit about the HSIP set asides. So yes, there's a PowerPoint that I tracked down. So I'll put that in the chat with the slides identified where it talks specifically about those funding set asides like you mentioned.
All right, thank you. Yes, and Devin had another question of, is the LRSP certification the same as the Safe Streets and Roads for All action plan? And Paul and I have had a lot of conversations about this, and they do differ, because we've looked at how can agencies with an LRSP have a qualifying action plan, and the areas we've seen of most difference is around community engagement. If there's language of working towards zero traffic related fatalities, and then the last one being an equity analysis. That is probably I think the equity analysis is the one that I haven't really seen show up in an LRSP very often. All right, thank you, Paul. All right, moving forward here. The next, we're going to go into some of the SB1 programs. The first is the local partnership program. So this is comprised of about 200 million of SB1 funds annually. 60% of those funds go to the formula component, and the agencies that are eligible for the formula component are those that have a voter approved tax or fees. So those are agencies like, we talked about earlier with the self-help sales tax measures, as well as I believe BART in the Bay Area also qualifies because of their fees that were approved I think it was two to 4 years ago. They had an increase in fees. And the remaining 40% of the local partnership program funds go to the competitive program, and that is going to have a call for projects this year. The CTC will be approving those guidelines at the August meeting, and then the program will be active after that. And the 40%, to be eligible for the competitive program, agencies need to have either voter approved taxes or fees similar to the formula component, or have a uniform impact fees. And there's pretty specific language that an agency's development impact fee needs to include, that demonstrates that the funds collected go directly towards a transportation project. Having an overall impact fee without that clarity is not eligible. And I've run into that several times over the last 2 cycles with the CTC, and just needing to demonstrate the clarity within those ordinances. These funds, again, are very flexible. Like so many of these other programs we've talked about, they'll fund rehabilitation, complete streets, transit improvements, roadway operational improvements. The one thing they will not fund is they will not fund projects that increase vehicle miles traveled. That's the one big kind of nuance here moving forward. As previously, local partnership program funds could be used on a project that increases vehicle miles traveled. But moving forward, starting last cycle and then again this cycle, you'll need to not only be able to demonstrate that you don't increase VMT, but also show a VMT decrease, which really goes towards needing to have a multimodal project. And lastly, these programs require a 50% match. So it does have the highest threshold of matching fund requirements. Next is the Solutions for Congested Corridors program. This receives about 250 million annually. And these funds are restricted in that only metropolitan planning organizations, or MPOs, regional transportation agencies, and Caltrans are eligible to compete for the funds. So as a local agency, a city or county, you would need to partner with your regional agency to pursue these funds. A comprehensive multimodal corridor plan is required for these funds, right? So the corridor in question would need to have this overall multimodal analysis of improvements prepared, and the CTC has specific guidelines about what is required for a multimodal corridor plan. I know the regional agencies statewide have been preparing these plans for different congested corridors in their regions, whether it's just a singular highway corridor or it's multiple corridors. I think down in the Inland Empire, they did one for nearly every highway in their 2 counties. What we see a lot of here is the innovative use of project bundling, and Paul's going to go into that in more detail tomorrow. But what that is combining multiple projects together in an effort to demonstrate a larger, holistic benefit to the transportation network. And this does not require a funding match, though, having a match definitely helps. It increases your competitiveness. It is not required. Next, and this is one that I like quite a bit and have done a lot of these grant applications, and that's the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, or TSEP. It is comprised of SB1 funds, primarily from diesel excise tax, as well as federal good movement funds. 40% of the funds are allocated towards Caltrans nominated projects, and 60% go towards local agency nominated projects, and then broken out into separate regions across the state. The projects really need to demonstrate freight benefits for trucks and trains or ports. I've been on calls with the CTC staff about this program and the need to, how you can demonstrate, right, the increased truck throughput or truck speeds on a roadway, or if you can show, if you have a project that involves the rail, how the project will increase rail speeds and rail reliability. This is going to fund projects like highway improvements and interchanges, grade separations, rail specific projects, right? Anything that really demonstrates that goods movement nexus. And it requires a 30% funding match. So similar to the local partnership program, as well as local partnership program, as well as the Solutions for Congested Corridors program. The call for projects is going to be, or the guidelines will be approved in August, and the call for projects will be issued shortly thereafter. In this program, the applications are going to be due in November. We do have a question in the chat from Alex on the local partnership program. Can I provide a link to the required language in the local bond measure ordinance? Yes, Alex. When I get to the break, I will send you a link to the grant guidance or the guidelines. And then should you have additional questions, let me know, because I have examples of local ordinances that do comply with the local partnership program requirements. Next, and we're not quite sure if this program is going to come back. We'll have to see as budgets move forward, and that's the Urban Greening Grant. And this was comprised of the greenhouse gas reduction funds, right? The cap and trade dollars. And it went towards projects that reduced greenhouse gas emissions. So that's GHG, mitigates extreme heat, and decreases air and water pollution. It funded projects like green streets, bicycle and pedestrian facilities, maybe you had bioswales that you wanted to implement, like a green alley project, We've seen it used in parks and waterway restorations. And this one had an even higher threshold for disadvantaged communities written into the legislation. So 75% of those funds go towards disadvantaged communities. Right, next, we're going to start getting into the federal grant programs. So first is the RAISE, or Rebuilding American Infrastructure with Sustainability and Equity. This is administered by USDOT. It is a program, if you remember the Tiger program that came out under President Obama, then it changed to BUILD under President Trump. So it's all the same program. Each president just kind of changes the name. And then some other little nuances in the program, but the overall intent of the program remains the same. Underneath the current presidential administration, it really is geared towards equity, and we'll talk more about equity and those policies later in our training. Climate change and environmental sustainability. It funds projects, a really broad range of improvements, whether that's a surface transportation project like roadway improvements or a bridge. It funds transit improvements, including purchase of vehicles or bus stop enhancement, transit stops and hubs, etc. Ports and airport improvements. Traditionally, it has a maximum funding request of 25 million. This last cycle, the USDOT increased it to 35 million. And it does require a 20% matching funds from non-federal sources. It's very specific, where you can't match federal funds with federal funds. And in the last round of projects, our last call for projects, they actually removed the requirement for matching funds if your project was located in a low income or disadvantaged community. Next is the infra, or Infrastructure for Rebuilding America. This is part of that has the statute name of Nationally Significant Multimodal Freight and Highway Projects. Again, this is administered by USDOT. Projects need to demonstrate a national or regional economic benefits. Again, it funds just similar to RAISE, highways, bridges, transit, grade separations, really broad range of projects. It's split into two categories: those that have total costs of less than 100 million, and those that have total costs of over 100 million. This program requires 40% matching funds, and of that 40%, half of them, so 20% of the project, needs to be matched with non-federal funds. And this last requirement is one that can trip up some agencies, even though you can ask for pre-construction funds, right? You can ask for design, you can ask for environmental funds. Your project needs to reasonably begin construction within 18 months of when the funds are obligated, which is extremely challenging in most cases to complete environmental and design, or either one of those phases individually, within an 18-month span. And within the last round of funding, this program was bundled with two other programs. We'll go over here in just a second. And that came out under the Multimodal Project Discretionary Grant Program. For those who might have prepared an application under that program, infra is a subset of that. Next is the mega projects, and that is also known as the National Infrastructure Project Assistance, again administered by USDOT. And this goes towards projects that are large, over $100 million in total project costs, and you can demonstrate the significant need of federal funding, right? And so within that application process, We had to write exactly what would happen if a project did not receive federal funding and get that investment. So without it, maybe your project is delayed 2 additional years or 5 years, or you're not able to implement it, period, right? Or it causes a lot of financial stress on your institution. So there's different things that you have to talk about in there. And again, this program does require a 20% non-federal matching funds. Next, for those who are in the non-urbanized areas, there is the Rural Surface Transportation Grant. And this was, again, it's administered by USDOT. It funds projects that are outside the urbanized areas. We did prepare a couple of these applications during the last cycle. They require 20% matching funds, or non-federal, specifically non-federal matching funds. And this one does have that same caveat as infra, that construction to reasonably begin within 18 months. And that is something that does, like I said before, it does create a bit of a challenge if you are requesting design and environmental phase funds. Next, and I think maybe some on this call are working on or evaluating this program. It's the Safe Streets and Roads for All, or SS4A. It is going to be administered annually, right? So if you didn't go after it this year, you still have a chance next year. And it will fund non-infrastructure planning and implementation for Vision Zero type projects. And based on Paul and I's review of the NOFO, or Notice of Funding Opportunity, and the requirements for a Safe Streets Action Plan, Vision Zero is a pretty critical component of that. And eligible activities, there are two. There are one, you could request funds to do the action plan, and there's very specific about, our USDT is specific about what is needed in that action plan. Or if you happen to have an eligible action plan, you could pursue implementation. And grant applications for this program are due September 15th. We've had this question asked before. We kind of went into it a little bit earlier, in that locally prepared LRSPs, so your local roadway safety plan, should qualify for an action plan, but you need to check your LRSP against the self-certification worksheet. And that's what you see here, is a little snippet of that self-certification worksheet. And we did include that link to that worksheet within the helpful links guidance. And we can drop it there into the chat as well during the break, just so you have it handy on how you can check your LRSP, or potentially maybe even your SSAR, if you happen to have prepared one of those. So it's your systemic safety analysis report. Okay, and then we have here in the chat from Casey McFerrin, what are Vision Zero projects? Sure, Casey. So Vision Zero projects, those are identified through a Vision Zero plan, right? So Vision Zero, and Paul, correct me where I go astray here, is that Vision Zero is the intent to work for an agency to work towards implementing projects that reduce serious injuries and traffic fatalities to zero. And so Vision Zero projects are those safety, multimodal safety projects that have been identified through a Vision Zero plan.
Yeah, you got it. And then there's a chat question. What's LRSP again? So LRSP is the acronym for Local Roadway Safety Plan, or Local Road Safety Plan. And it's required as part of that HSIP program. We're seeing a lot of similarities, but different names. An LRSP is historically might be a Vision Zero plan at a local agency. but it's this review of your crash history, bringing multidisciplinary representatives together to talk about what the crash history is and how you can address those from an engineering perspective as well as non-engineering. So say education or enforcement or encouragement activities. So there's a broad mix of different E's. We'll talk about some of that later too, but that's that LRSP. Okay, Ryan.
Thank you, Paul. Next federal program is the CRISI program, or Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvements. This one is specifically administered by FRA, so the Federal Railroad Administration, a subset of USDOT, the Department of Transportation. It funds rail improvements at grade crossings, grade separations, and specifically they've added in rail set aside, or rail trespassing improvements, right? So making it challenging for individuals to cross the railroad right of way with barriers or fencing in an effort to reduce not just trespassing in general, but also reducing train related crashes. The program is broken into 3 subsets. One is it's referred to as track 1 for planning, track 2 for preliminary engineering, so your design phase and environmental clearance, which is NEPA here. So, and Paul will go through NEPA briefly later. And then lastly, track 3 being construction. It does require a 20% non-federal match. And a question here in the chat from Chanda. Would bike ped only crossings qualify for CRISI, or do they have to be vehicular? So I'll need to check the guidance, Shanda, during the break, but I believe that bike ped only crossing is eligible through CRISI. Next is the Railroad Crossing Elimination Program. Or let me back up 1 second here. So CRISI is going to have a call for projects, or at the federal level, it's referred to as a Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO. They're going to have their their NOFO released in August. So one that is, they said initially it was going to be released in June, but clearly we're at the end of June, so it's probably in July. And that's this program here, the Railroad Crossing Elimination Program. This is a brand new program through the IIJA, or Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act, which is also referred to as the BIL, Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And the intent of this program is to eliminate at-grade crossings and enhance multimodal safety. And it does fund grade separations or track relocation. So if you're relocating the track away from an existing crossing, has a minimum funding award of $1 million. It'll fund all phases of work from environmental through construction, and it does require a 20% non-federal funding match. And that was our last of the programs. I know I've been getting a lot of questions recently about the Bridge Investment Program, or BIP. So that also has a call for projects out right now that are staggered due dates. And if anybody has questions about that, I'm happy to chat about that offline in the chat. And with that, we're going to go ahead and take a 10-minute break. So right now it is about 9:32, and we will come back at 9:42 for the next module. Back. Our next module here we're going to go into is the impacts of federal funding. Right, because for those who have dealt with federal funding in the past, you do know that it does add another level of complexity to your project development and delivery. And we, again, are going to start out with a poll just to understand, how the familiarity of everybody here with federal aid projects. So let us know what your experience is. Are you a newbie? Maybe you've done 2 or less projects that have are federally funded. Maybe you've done 3 to 5. You're still learning, or this is old hat for you. You've got this down. You've done 5 or more through your career. You know the local assistance process inside and out. I'm getting some good responses here in the chat from everyone. Okay, we'll go ahead and close this poll, and let's take a look at everyone's experience here. So looks like we've got a lot of folks that are still learning the process. 45% are new to it and have done 2 or less projects. 28% are still learning. You've done some. And then lastly, 27%, it's old hat. You've got this stuff down. You're doing it all the time. We'll go ahead and stop the share and the polling, and we'll move on. I do see a note in the chat that the Zoom notes differ than that posted online. So Joel, I think that you mean that our presentation might be slightly different than what's posted online. I'll circle back around with Dustin to make sure that the most recent PDF version of our presentation is posted online. We did have some changes from our previous presentation to today.
Ryan, I think it's a feature with Zoom that there's ongoing notes.
You have a project that is federally. Otter notes don't. The Otter online notes don't contain these links. Okay, yeah. We'll talk with Dustin and Tracy after the presentation to figure out what the Otter online notes and the links there. Okay. So for projects that are federally funded through FHWA, so the Federal Highway Administration, they do require adherence to the Caltrans local assistant process and do include their involvement. So Caltrans local assistance administers both federally and state funded projects. So if you happen to have had an active transportation program or ATP project that is funded with state only funds, you do have involvement from local assistance, particularly when you go around to requesting authorizations for construction or approvals from the CTC. And we'll get into that. I'll get into that in a couple more slides. And so funding allocation is required by phase. So we'll get into that as well. There is compliance required with federal aid procedures. And lastly, what Caltrans local assistance does is they help project implementation and oversight. So that's conflict of interest reviews, right, for those agencies that utilize consultant project management or program management support. They provide DBE reviews and compliance, environmental stewardship, and lastly, right-of-way encroachments. When you have the federal funding, it does require adherence to the LAPM or Local Assistance Procedures Manual. And this document provides the requirements for delivering federally funded projects. by local agencies. It includes many standard forms for local agency use. This has helped to streamline the process, so we're not all recreating these forms each time we need to submit documentation to the state. And from my experience, there are 4 important chapters, and those of you who have done this in the past, maybe you found other chapters be really important as well during project delivery. I'm going to mention just 4 here. The first is chapter 3 under project authorization, chapter 6, the environmental process, chapter 13 for right-of-way, and chapter 16, which is the administration of construction contracts, right? And each of those chapters provides guidance and links to standard forms, etc., that local agencies will need to comply with as you're advancing your project through these phases or requesting authorization to begin a phase. And I have here on screen just a link to the LAPM that's also provided within the helpful links handout. Well, as I mentioned, project allocations are really, that's a big part of compliance with federal and state funded projects. And they do differ slightly, excuse me. The requirements do differ slightly for federal and state funds. And it's important to note that an authorization or approval by the CTC or California Transportation Commission is required before you can begin reimbursable activities, right? So if you begin a project or begin a phase and you haven't received your reimbursement approval, those activities are not going to be eligible for you to submit your bills to Caltrans for them to pay, to reimburse your agency for those that design work or project management, construction activities, etc. Now, if you have a federally funded project, the allocation process is known as the request for authorization, or RFA. And like I said, it is required for each phase. There are different attachments that are needed to go along with your request for authorization. And it really does depend on the phase. And the Local Assistance Procedures Manual, or LAPM, does tell you what those requirements are for each phase. And then lastly, when it is approved, you're going to receive an E76 from Caltrans. That's your documentation of approval to be in reimbursement. At a state level, or for those that are state funded, where it differs here is that you aren't doing the RFA. What you're preparing is a funding allocation request letter to the California Transportation Commission, and as well as in the LAPG, or Local Assistance Procedures Guide, or Programs Guide, excuse me, Exhibit 25C. There used to be different chapters for all the different state programs, but now it's been consolidated into Chapter 25. The attachments, again, will change based upon the phase of work. And you can see here's a snapshot of those different requirements. So if you are going for construction, because it's the one with the most requirements, not only do you have to have your CTC allocation form, you need to have your 22, or now it's 25C, your state only finance letter, a copy of the MTIP or FTIP. So MTIP is the Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program, or FTIP is the other name, and that's the Federal Transportation Improvement Program, right? That's the document that is prepared and updated by your regional transportation agency or your metropolitan planning organization. That includes all of the federally funded projects or regionally significant projects within your region. Your CEQA or NEPA documentation is also required. You need to prepare your right-of-way certification. And lastly, including portion of your plans and estimate. And they're really looking for your cover sheet, layout sheets, cross sections, striping plans, etc. I'm going to talk briefly here about NEPA clearance, and then Paul in the next module is going to go a little bit further. But when you do have a federally funded project, you need to comply with NEPA, or the National Environmental Protection Act. Caltrans has FHWA delegated authority for NEPA. What that means is that you will be coordinating with Caltrans for the approval of your NEPA document and not FHWA. California is one of the states in a unique position where the federal government has delegated the approval authority to the state for NEPA documents. As I mentioned previously, Chapter 6 in the LAPM includes what you need for the environmental process. So the initial step in the process for NEPA is the preparation of the PES, or your preliminary environmental study, and a field review with Caltrans. So the PES includes information about the project, including description, cost, schedule, as well as the anticipated environmental technical studies and the anticipated level of CEQA NEPA clearance. And Paul's going to go a little much further into these, but just as a for a little bit of information here is that in NEPA there are 3 levels of approval or actions that we typically see. The first is the categorical exclusion, which is referred to as CE or a Cat X. Next is the environmental assessment, and then lastly is the biggest one is the environmental impact statement. So this chart, you look at it, you're like, holy cow, this is a lot, and it maybe is overwhelming. I know it is for me when I look at this chart. And so this is just a distilled version of the Caltrans right-of-way process that's described in the right-of-way manual. So the right-of-way chapter 13 in the LAPM does point to the Caltrans right-of-way manual. And what this this chart here shows, and this was prepared by one of Paul and my colleagues who has done a lot of right-of-way and utility relocations in his career, is it really outlines the process that you need to go, and a local agency goes through when you're acquiring a right-of-way for a federally funded project, all the way from doing your appraisals and acquisitions, all the way through negotiations and gaining possession of the properties, and all down through your certification for your certification, your right-of-way certification, and the approval of your E76. And Brett, I'm glad you like the chart. It is within our PDF handout of the PowerPoint presentation. And then we also, if this chart wasn't enough, I think we even have one similar to this for the utility relocation process as well, that I'm happy to send to you directly. Oh, the right-of-way process, you can see here, this can go anywhere from 18 months to 24 months, right? So you really have to anticipate and schedule accordingly for the right-of-way and utility relocation process for federally funded work. We've, as you saw within the right-of-way chart on the previous page, that there are cost and schedule implications with using federal aid. So it's important as a local agency to understand what those implications are and be able to account for those in your budget and schedule. So having federal aid can really add time to your schedule. So it can, depending on the complexity of your project, it can add anywhere from 6 to 12 months to your schedule, right? And that's built in just with your allocation requests, needing to go through your NEPA clearance, because, and those who have delivered a federally funded local street project know that, you know, you could do a very simple CEQA document, but when you involve federal aid, you will be doing or could be doing different technical studies, which do add time to your schedule. Right-of-way acquisitions, right? And utility locations, all that is going to add, you know, like I showed, 18 to 24 months to your project schedule. It can increase costs again, depending on the complexity, $400,000 up to $400,000, maybe even more. And that comes from additional environmental technical studies and document preparation for NEPA, as well as just the administrative costs, right, of preparing the different forms in the LAPM, as well as the request for authorizations. And lastly, and importantly, as right now we are seeing so much inflation in construction pricing and just constantly chasing those in our estimates, is that added time does result in increased costs, right? Whereas the when we prepare estimates for projects, we're typically dealing with an escalation of 3 to 3.5% had been what was previously what we were budgeting, but inflation has outpaced that significantly right now. So, you know, just understanding that, right, that anytime you're adding extra days or months, years onto your project, it does increase the project cost. And lastly, if you want to learn more about the federal aid process, the LTAP does a fantastic job of having courses all throughout the year for to help local agencies to learn more about the federal aid process and improve your knowledge and your ability to manage projects that are funded through federal dollars. And so if you want to learn more, I encourage you, go to the LTAP webpage, sign up for the courses. I know this is an older screenshot, but as you can see, if you want to know more about right-of-way and utilities, hey, that's coming up in July and October. So there's many opportunities to learn more about federal aid. And with that, I'll pass it over to Paul for the next module.
Excellent. So then I am in the office, but Ryan, I'm getting a little choppy internet. Let me know how it sounds.
Hey, Paul, I'm not hearing you at all.
Yeah. How about now? I'm in the office. I'm hardwired connected. Nothing.
Oh, I hear you fine.
Okay, everybody else does, it's just me. Okay, never mind. Go ahead, Paul.
Okay, good. Thanks everyone chiming in there. Also, Ryan noted there, he was pointing out the various LTAP training programs. Our handout, there is a PDF handout that has various links on that. So make sure that you look for that. And then earlier there was some discussion about the Otter notes. I looked at that a little bit. I think the Otter notes is just a transcription of all the discussion that's occurring today. So when Ryan and I talk about the handouts or the slides, those are preset things. The slides, of course, what we're going through, and then we have a dedicated sheet with various website links that are relevant and useful here. All right, so I'm going to talk through environmental status and environmental review. So this is a basic primer about CEQA and NEPA for everyone's benefit. There's some content, a lot of data, like text on the slides. So I'm not going to read through all of it, but just want everyone to be able to get a sense of where we land on CEQA and NEPA. So Ryan, can you advance the next? So we start with an interactive poll for everyone. When we talk about environmental clearance, does that make you nervous? Or you think that's fine? I've got someone else that I can delegate that out to, or someone else is responsible for that topic. or you do a lot of that. It's not such a big deal. Give it a second here. And I mentioned those subsequent slides, there's a lot of content in text there. It's hard to find some good graphics about environmental review. So we put it in where we can, but because of that, I'll just be breezing through some of it. And some of you do a lot of this environmental review can certainly chime in if I say anything that's amiss. Ryan's got the feedback on the poll on the screen there. So yeah, environmental, sweaty and nervous, about 40%. Just over 50% of the crowd is saying it's fine, someone else is responsible for that. And then about 10% of you. We've got about 100 people. So there's a handful of people that have are familiar with that. We saw that when we asked at the beginning, what field or what discipline are you coming from? And there were some of the team participants here that talk about doing environmental review. All right, so that's helpful. Thank you. We'll keep going. So just broadly talking about environmental review and grants. The answer is it depends on the grant. Typically, environmental review is not required, but it really can help with proactively showing that your agency is ready to advance whatever this project is. Say you have some sort of implementation. If you need to do environmental review, hopefully it's a lower cost item to go ahead and advance that, and you can deal with the schedule and the cost implications, and then go to a grant funding agency and document. You've already worked out those issues and gone through those steps to complete your environmental review. And then we've got our two categories. The state is California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA. It is going to be required, some environmental documentation for those state and locally funded grants. And then on a national level, NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act. So if there's some sort of federal funds, like we were talking about HSIP earlier, or some of the other federal funding sources, then you're going to need some federal funds. Even I say that out loud, HSIP, there's some dynamic where the state's been able to get state-only funds for HSIP and other funding sources. So you're really going to have to talk to your funding agency about whether it's state or federal and the implications for that. And at the bottom there, if you are thinking about some of these various funding sources, really dig through the prior set of guidelines or the current guidelines and determine if environmental review is required. As you see there, some of the Senate Bill 1, SB 1 funding programs do require environmental review, but not all of them. Okay, next slide. Let's see, double checking the chat. Yeah. All right. So then on the California side, we go all the way back to 1970 with Governor Reagan. That really signed into law that environmental review occur within the state to minimize significant adverse environmental effects to the extent feasible. And we've definitely seen CEQA evolve over time. There is some opportunity for it to be a joint review if needed with the National Environmental Review. I'll keep going here. The next slide. The thing I wanted to point out for everybody is really when we talk about CEQA on the state level, there's the Office of Planning and Research in Sacramento that is relevant to help define what type of analysis occurs from a statewide level. And I said there's some evolution there, and it really is based on case law and where we stand with the CEQA guidelines that get published. So you see the image here on the right, published by OPR, but also in partnership with a professional organization, the Association of Environmental Professionals, AEP. So they document that CEQA guidelines, Appendix G, which is shown on the next slide. Here we see the checklist form that really talks about the variety of topics that might need to be analyzed. So for everyone's benefit, just to understand, we might have a transportation project, but you need to look at things like the aesthetics potentially, or cultural resources, all these various things. Some are common and some are infrequent. So it really does vary. Your environmental professionals are going to be able to tell you at what point do we decide, do we do this? or do we need a comprehensive technical analysis? Do we need a plan for some budget to analyze all of these or some of these? Typically, it's all would not happen very often or very infrequently, but there's some go-tos that are happening all the time. So then transition then the next, we talk about on the SQL side, the document types. So I talked about the technical studies that might happen on the prior slide and showed the topics there. And then we have levels or types of documents for environmental review on the SQL side. And these scale up from simple to more complicated. So the first one with that categorical exemption is really saying, we've got some sort of project, hopefully some typical thing like a maintenance project that has a standardized exemption. So there's documented 33 categorical exemptions. So your environmental professional might hear about the project description and say, that's fine, I can do a CE. There's a typical exemption for that. And it's much more memo checklisty, very simplified process. But if there's some issues where you're thinking, okay, we need to more carefully evaluate the various technical topics and determine if we need to advance to some sort of negative declaration or mitigated negative declaration, then you do that initial study and ND document. So you're determining if there might be some impact. And again, it's a negative declaration if there's no impact. And then in the terminology, we just tack on the word mitigated at the front if there is some documented mitigation to address the issue, whatever that is, right? So if we're talking about a water quality impact, a concern about water quality and the water, like a roadway widening project that's going to have additional water flow into some sort of blue line stream or to the ocean, is there a mechanism for mitigation? Some sort of water quality management feature, then that would be a mitigation, for example, and then you're in the mitigated negative declaration category. And if there's some more complicated analysis, or you know that there's some sort of impact that might not be able to mitigate, then you go to that next level, the environmental impact report, EIR, and it's got once that's completed, there's a notice of determination. So we've got these terms for the SQL level. The idea is that we're making it more transparent and clear to the public at large about these potential environmental impacts, that you're identifying mitigation measures to really reduce the impact on the environment and building that into the project. So it gets pretty clunky and, there's a lot of, the reports get really large, unfortunately, through an EIR, but that is the process to really document all that analysis and the impacts and then identify mitigation measures. So we'll talk now about the NEPA side, the national side, and it really parallels a lot of what we just talked about on the SQL side. The terms are a little different, but the same idea. Again, we're going back to the 70s and we're looking at the potential effect from some sort of proposed action on the environment. And then NEPA does look at some other topics, some other technical areas that maybe don't show up on the SQL side and address these concerns like natural or historic resources, for example. We'll keep going. And on the NEPA side, the document types, you see again this parallel, these three types. Categorical exclusion is kind of, we've got some typical project type that we already know can be excluded because it's simplified, it's not a big change to the environment. So there might be a cat X that you can use. And then the comparable to that negative declaration is this environmental assessment or a finding of no significant impacts, or FONSI. So at least on the national side, we get a cool acronym there. So then the document's supposed to be brief and concise, all these. And again, we're documenting if there's some sort of impact that can be mitigated or addressed to reduce the significance. And then if not, then you're kicked up to this higher level, an environmental impact statement, EIS. And just like a notice of determination, you've got a record of decision. All right. And then our NEPA process, you see, at least there's some graphics out there, bit flowchart, flowcharts to see how you move through the process. So I've been involved with environmental documents to just know, rely on your SQL NEPA experts and really ask a lot of questions to understand what are the implications. And when we talk about it relative to grants, some of the implications might be relevant is cost assumptions about technical analysis and schedule implications of going through your SQL or NEPA process. All right. And as a reminder, in the chat, people have been weighing in on various things, but certainly if there's any questions, feel free to ask a question in the chat and we can try and help address any of those. Otherwise, I'll hand it back off to Ryan.
All right, thank you, Paul. I determined that my issue of not being able to hear you was I had muted my speakers while we were on break, and so that's why.
Okay, great.
User error.
You're back at it. I hear you just fine too. It's good.
All right, so impacts on the state right of way or the state highway system. When you have a project that does impact the state highway system, there are sets of project delivery approval processes that are required for those improvements. Oh, here's a simple chart that we've prepared that demonstrates the 3 standard levels of Caltrans approvals. We'll start at the bottom here and just work our way up to the top. So the first is the encroachment permit process. That's where you have a project that's under $1 million within the state right of way and has a schedule, it's really fast, 3 to 6 months. And that's where you work with the permit office to get that encroachment permit to go in and construct the improvements. They're typically, like I said, they're $1 million, so they're very low cost traditionally. The next level up is the design engineering evaluation report, or DEER. It had previously been known as the PEER, or project engineering evaluation report. This is for projects that are just a little more to them. It's for those that are over $1 million in the state right of way. They're non-complex, right? So they do not require structures, retaining walls, bridge widening, etc. And they do not have any public concerns. And then lastly, then once you get your DEER approved, you get your encroachment permit to go out and construct. And then the last level here, which is the standard process, it restarts with the project initiation document phase, which is your project study report, or which is the PSR, or your project study report, project development support, which is a PSR PDS. Then you advance into the PA and ED phase. So that's project approval and environmental document. That's where you have your project report, or PR, as well as your CEQA and or NEPA document. And lastly is final design, or plan specifications and estimate, before getting the approvals to advance into construction. So just a quick snapshot there of the levels of Caltrans project delivery approvals. For grants, it does require coordination with your Caltrans district, and the state has made it easier for us, and we'll provide some examples here shortly of the state highway impact assessment form. And what this does is demonstrates Caltrans awareness of your project, and includes some basic information about the agency and descriptions of the work within the Caltrans right of way, what's important to know, and those who just did the ATP applications and had a project involving Caltrans know that you've got to get this form done 4 weeks before grant approval or before grant submission. And that if Caltrans is an applicant or a co-applicant, this document is not required, right? Because as an applicant or co-applicant, they already know about the project. So you don't need to demonstrate that they're aware through this assessment. And we're going to go here, like I mentioned, to a couple examples. So first is the OC Loop segments OPQ in Orange County. This is a class 1 trail along a creek, the Coyote Creek in North Orange County, South LA County. And here's the first part of the assessment form, where we filled out the agency's contact information, which grant program we're submitting on. And then lastly, you can see where that purple arrow points to, which is the % of work within the Caltrans right-of-way. So this trail crosses underneath the I-5 freeway. Very, very low percentage of the project at 1%, and 700,000 for costs. And here on the lower part of the form, and we'll go into this here real quickly, and then I see a couple questions in the chat that I'll get to. So here on the second page of the form, what I want to draw your attention to is where that purple arrow is again, stating, right, as we went through earlier, the Caltrans approval process that's required. So we talked, as we previously mentioned, 1% of the project is within the Caltrans right-of-way, less than $1 million. So it is an encroachment permit oversight process that's checked there. And let me jump here, a couple questions in the chat.
Yeah, the first one from Chanda, I think it's essentially saying, could we do NEPA analysis in advance of getting federal funds? But
that is a challenge because there is not there's not a nexus, just as you mentioned, to do NEPA analysis before getting the federal funds. And we've had conversations with agencies thinking, the same thing. Hey, we want to go out and get federal funds for this project, so we want to do a NEPA, but there's not a trigger yet until those monies are secured to bring Caltrans in for doing the NEPA clearance. It's that kind of a chicken before the egg sort of deal that we deal with, and but you can do some things to kind of help prepare for it. So you can, as you're doing your environmental technical studies, you can do them to a NEPA level, right? So you do them at a higher, or to meet the NEPA the NEPA requirements in preparation that you may be receiving federal aid money in the future. The next question from Mary at North County Transit in San Diego is the state highway assessment form required only for highway projects, or is it transit as well? So if and Mary, if you are submitting on a state grant that is going to touch the Caltrans system, you will need to submit a state highway impact assessment form. And one thing I should have pointed out here on the first page, you can see this project program and lots of different state programs, whether, this example is an ATP, but if you are doing even a TIRCP grant, right, that's very specific for transit agencies, the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program, you do still need to do a Caltrans assessment form. All right, moving on to the next case study. This is in Los Banos, and this is a roadway widening extension project around the community, and I'm going to show it in other examples as well. And here, what I want to draw your attention to is the anticipated level of environmental documentation. So for this project, because of its size and complexity, it does have a higher level of environmental documentation. So it has an EIR, an environmental impact report, and an EA, so environmental assessment. And how that correlates to the second half of the form, you can see here is under the first purple arrow is under the SB 743 requirement. So the vehicle miles of traveled is that, yes, this project does add lane miles to the state highway system. There's impacts at 3 intersections on the state highway system. And so it does have that increase in capacity. And then you can also see there on item number 6, well, we did have a VMT analysis prepared for the project. And in this instance, it was 150 vehicle miles traveled, and it was documented in the traffic report for the project. And then down below in the next section, where the purple arrow is again, is we did select A because, yes, it will impact environmentally sensitive areas. This crosses over creeks and impacts farmlands. So it has an EIR or EIS, and that's what's selected there at A. And then down below in the middle there, it's not quite, we've crossed over the threshold for an encroachment permit, but we're not at the level where we need the standard oversight. So it is using the DEER or the design engineering evaluation report, also known as the streamline oversight project. Depending on what district you're working in, I've heard it called both ways. And so that's why the number 2 there is checked on the state highway project assessment form. Transitioning here slightly to the Caltrans transportation ART permit process. So where we saw this really come into play are for all those agencies who submitted Clean California grants to the state that were awarded, right? That were really geared towards improving the built environment and providing aesthetic features and cleaning up litter within public facilities, roadways and parks, as well as at the Caltrans facilities. And so there is a specific process to go through if you are doing an art installation, right? And these are graphics and sculptures, sculptural artwork to be proposed, installed, and maintained by the local agencies. Excuse me. So Caltrans will not be taking ownership of it, that you as the local agency are going to be responsible for the maintenance of these art features. And there is a 6-step process, and we've provided a link below for that process. But just here briefly, it involves creating the concept proposal, which then goes to the preliminary proposal, to the qualified proposal, and then lastly to your final proposal, which gets approved, and you advance to your encroachment permit to install the art installation. And on the link here below, I have a link to the program for those guidelines, and then to the process for the Caltrans art permit, and that is also provided within our helpful links guidance. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Paul to talk about project definition.
So we'll go through a couple of these slides real quick here, but also want to take a break here. So let's aim to just go through a few real fast, and then we'll take a break at about 10:35. Sound good? All right, so we start with the poll. Describe the typical project description thought process at your agency. So we've got 4 options there. We have a running list of needs for the next 5 years. We use a priority list. or maybe my boss picks a project, or we react to whatever's going on. There might be something hot within the agency. So none of this will be used against you. So it's just an opportunity for you to think about it and see where the rest of the group lands as well. We talked earlier a little bit about things like local roadway safety plans or Vision Zero documents. Typically, some sort of planning document within your agency might have a prioritized list of projects, but we do see a lot of clients that aren't always simply going to the priority list. So maybe we see that in the poll responses here. All right, so yeah, about 50% has a running list using that for the next 5 years, and a good amount, 34%, using a priority list. So that is nice to see. There's a high percentage, about 85% roughly, of people that are really using some sort of planning process to identify projects. Still some reactionary activities or something about, my boss picking something. So hopefully we can help narrow that in the field. And I think that's where we see things like action plans from the federal perspective or local roadway safety plans really pushing for all agencies to use some sort of advanced planning process to identify projects. So I want to spend a little time talking about how we think about project description when you're writing a grant application, and how you define things, and really getting in the mindset of thinking the reviewer is not going to be someone from the area. They're not going to know what the project is or the circumstances. And how do we clearly define what that project is? We definitely have seen grant applications where sometimes you're just kind of scratching your head, like, I'm not sure what the project is. So here we've got some graphics to be able to define it. And we talk about project limits, even just as simple as I have a project from A to B. So on the screen, we've got an example of a grade separation where we're taking the project was taking the roadway and separating it from the at grade railroad crossing. So a bridge over the rail. So that's on McKinley Street, in this case, between Magnolia Avenue on the west and the 91 freeway on the east in the city of Corona. And we really need to think about defining things just as start there. What are the extents? It's from here to there type discussion, typically for infrastructure. If it's not infrastructure, you might also be able to say within this geography or in this buffer or the school enrollment boundary or something like that, really defining your extents. And then we keep going, move on to the next slide. We talk about then a little bit about what are the needs, and thinking about how you can explain that in some sort of written narrative, but also through graphics and how those graphics can support you. So here we still are focused on this grade separation project, and a circumstance here where a lot of the land uses in the area of this grade separation are industrial warehousing that might have a lot of trucking activity. So you can imagine a narrative discussion talking about the servicing, the commercial goods movement, and the trucks, large vehicles crossing an at-grade rail, and the safety issues associated with that of trucks queuing and blocking the railroad. In this graphic, really showing the roadway network in the area and where those land uses are that are going to be serviced by goods movement trucks. And then on this, it does talk about project need. I talk about crash history in this case, or the land use, but then also you might talk about barriers to access or other things that like a railroad, or in this case, the freeway is a pretty obvious barrier if you wanted to cross over. What are those things that constrict your access and mobility, or address other needs that might align with your grant funding program? Okay, next slide. All right, and then we do want to use an example. We're trying to pull in different examples. These are not all projects that I've worked on. Here's an example with the city of Sacramento. We give props to the city. And the prior ATP cycle 5, the city submitted a grant application that got the highest score. So I simply went to the ATP funding program and downloaded their application. You can download those ones that get the state funding, and just flip through and try to look at graphics. So here you see a lot of this definition of the project limits. The project need is defined through this terminology LTS, level of traffic stress, for somebody cycling on this roadway, for example. And the little inset box on the graphic is showing existing conditions along that roadway. It's a 4-lane road with no bike lanes, speeding issues. That yields a LTS 4, and the red is reinforcing that that's bad, right? In the bottom right on our graphic, we do see a legend showing LTS 1 through 4, and the color scheme aligns with good, bad. And then it says the proposed Franklin Boulevard. When it goes to a 2-lane roadway, we can add in this project, it adds in an enhanced bikeway type, a class 4 separated facility, and the anticipated speed reduction. And collectively that is addressing our need and achieving a better result. So graphically and in the written narrative, they were able to stretch that out, but on this image, able to convey that message about what the project is and how it's going to solve some sort of need. Okay, we'll go to the next one, and then we'll take a break after this one for about 10 minutes. So here we see, photographs can benefit you as well. This image shows some sort of water quality treatment, an infiltration facility on a roadway, but you might have some obvious things like sidewalk gap closures or some sort of other physical barrier, as I mentioned. But what are those needs? Can I take a photograph of it? Can I have an image that shows that? Is the project maybe purchasing land for some sort of new facility, or are we redesigning the roadway for some sort of complete streets or vision zero concept like what was shown on the Franklin image? So get in that mindset of thinking about who the reviewer is. They don't know the area. Talk about what the needs are and how images and graphics can really convey how the proposed project will solve whatever those challenges are. So we do have more slides on the project description and defining your projects, but we'll take a break here for about 10 minutes for everyone to get up and walk around and stretch, and we'll reconvene at 10:45. Thanks. All right, we'll start in about a minute. All right, so I think it's about 10:45, so we'll get back into it and keep talking about project description and how you talk about that, how you address your grant application needs and goals and objectives. So we'll keep rolling. Here I want to talk about, I mentioned some of the, of course, the extents, what are the needs, what are the challenges going on, what are the barriers? And then we transition to talking about benefits. What are the benefits that the solution will achieve? And you really pick and choose things, but really try and think about broadly how maybe some project can be defined or have components that are going to address multiple benefits. So on the screen, you see various things like VMT, which is vehicle miles traveled, which of course is relevant to air quality as well, but there might also be distinct air quality or safety benefits that are provided. You think about community resiliency to adapt to global climate change issues and challenges, or even things like simply goods movement. We're running our economy and continuing to have good, strong commerce throughout the nation and the state is important. We definitely see a lot of focus lately in the last few years about even transportation projects and how they're going to provide some sort of nexus and support with housing needs as well as job growth. And don't forget things like emergency response times. That example of the grade separation project is a good example of a case where the primary focus is really goods movement, but and probably safety improvements, but it can help address emergency response by not having a train block a roadway vehicle lanes. So all this really lines up with thinking, how is your project aligned with state policy mandates? And for example, the photograph on the right is an image of public engagement relative to demonstrating a bikeway project. So that was much more about mobility challenges and needs there. All right, keep going. Here we see this photograph. This is that same project in Humboldt County where we demonstrated a separated bikeway with temporary materials. So just a day long, actually we did over 2 days, but over 2 days demonstrating what did it look like if we striped out a bikeway within the space that was up against a curb face, and those cars that are to the left of the image are parked. So that demonstrated a potential infrastructure project. It was a public engagement activity. It demonstrated an infrastructure project, but I would really say that's an encouragement event where we were helping educate and display to the community what this infrastructure, this civil engineering project could do to really address the challenges that they see. So we are mixing both the infrastructure and non-infrastructure in that circumstance. The next slide talks, I think, has an image of, a more detailed list of non-infrastructure ideas. And this image on the right is a fact sheet that comes directly from the Active Transportation Resource Center, ATRC. So there's various topics that you might think about broadly about non-infrastructure. So here on the screen, I talk about everything except engineering on this non-infrastructure, such as education. So that might be some sort of event where you're directly educating the public and teaching maybe kids in school or the public through safety programs or safety campaigns. Encouragement events are those temporary demonstrations or walk to school day type activities. Enforcement activities is some way that you can integrate law enforcement and public safety officials in some of the things above, or a dedicated thing like crosswalk yielding behavior by motorists, right? So we see officers walking in a crosswalk, and then if a motorist doesn't yield, then maybe the a motor officer on a motorcycle would issue a citation to someone that doesn't yield, for example. So the law enforcement can be integrated. It definitely is a challenging topic. So we encourage everyone to think carefully about how you use law enforcement in your projects and how that can work within your community. Evaluation really talks about review and monitoring and evaluating how well the solutions are addressing the challenges. For example, if you're doing some sort of educational activity, how does it achieve the goals? If you're trying to educate the public about, say, riding a bicycle with the flow of traffic, do you have a before and after evaluation to be able to show the results? Or how well do you get the information out to the public at large? How many eyes are on it, views on some sort of advertisement, those types of things. And then equity is a topic that we continue to see growth in. How well are your projects, or how well do you come up with some sort of measures that are going to address a broad range of equity needs within your community? For example, are all the various things I talked about simply provided for English speaking audiences, or do we have translation for other languages in your community? Have we thought about different ways to engage a broad reach of the community, and not just people that are paying attention and on your email distribution list? So equity continues to grow and evolve on what that looks like in each community. And really everyone's challenged to think about how you can provide equitable solutions throughout your region and your jurisdiction. And I talk about really customizing these solutions, these ideas. It really does vary. So what you're going to see in Marin County is going to be different from San Diego County or Riverside County, for example. So we see this fact sheet example, and then I mentioned consider partnerships for the NI or non-infrastructure activities. Where are those opportunities to bring in community-based partners or other disciplines? So we see on the next slide, I think, is this image, with local law enforcement participating in a walk to school day event, with elementary age school kids in the city of Garden Grove. Here we see that the city pursued a ATP Cycle 2 grant for an infrastructure project, but they also incorporated the non-infrastructure activities of the Bike Safe Garden Grove program, as well as walk to school day activities. And then we're able to bring in city staff and the school faculty and students, of course, and local law enforcement to have a positive outcome on that day with a variety of different disciplines participating. Okay. And then getting back to defining your project description, I've got some examples and we'll breeze through some of this. There's a lot of text there. But if we talked about how some of these winning grants have achieved these goals and talked about what is the project. So in this case, you see this Franklin Complete Streets project. The text pulled directly from their grant application discussion is about transforming this roadway and the ugliest street in Sacramento, according to the Sacramento Bee. So what is the outcome that's going to be achieved? And the text in the narrative talks about meeting the mobility needs of those disadvantaged communities, but also supporting that community economic growth. Let's go to the next one. And some of that already, you've seen some of the policy nexus, and here in their grant application, they explicitly talked about addressing low-income and historically immigrant communities with a reduced or a lacking connectivity to provide greater mobility options. Next slide. And defining what those benefits are, addressing and improving the safety and mobility for users of all ages, incomes, and abilities. And then talking about what those various lane uses are that the connectivity would provide. The graphic on the screen is a location map, but you might then zoom in on that project study area and have what are those lane uses identified on those maps and how this project provides that access. Maybe in this case, it's much more of a north-south travel, but where are those destinations and how this corridor is probably a thoroughfare to be able to connect to those lane uses. Okay, next. This also is another one in the Sacramento region and Sacramento County along this roadway, Watt Avenue. For the northerly segment north of the freeway, this concept of really re-envisioning or reimagining this roadway as a multimodal, sustainable, and safe corridor, and talking about what are the desired outcomes resulting in. So in this case, this was a grant application asking for the planning funding to achieve these desired outcomes, defining what is the vision that we have at the end when the report is finished and ready for adoption, and identifying what those goals are and how does that align with the grant funding program. In this case, it was a Caltrans Sustainable Transportation Planning Grant that was pursued. Okay. And then on this one with North Watt, we talked a lot about what is the nexus to policy and the alignment with some key documents that are relevant to the state. Ryan's going to talk in more detail about what some of these are, but it definitely should be on everyone's radar. If you're going after a Caltrans grant, you're going to think about their smart mobility framework and the alignment with that. It might be kind of obvious for some of the transportation planning staff, but you really want to think about, in that case with Caltrans Smart Mobility, our project is built around some of these ideas, but make sure you get credit for that and you talk about it. We also see the Climate Action Plan for Transportation and Infrastructure. CAPTI is very important from a state level, how we build transportation projects that are going to help address climate change issues. So there might be multiple policies and documents that you would think about. These were a couple that were highlighted specifically for this grant. Next slide. And again, there's that vision. What is our outcome for this project? So you see a lot more discussion about residents can access different land uses in these different modes: cycling, walking, riding transit, addressing concerns and interests about safety for students and parents on these roadways, provide access to transit, and so on. You see all these really are achieved through this concept and the vision for this project. In the chat, yeah, I think it looks like Catherine, you put in the smart mobility framework. Thanks. So then for everyone's benefit, that's at least one of those in particular. And we'll double check that may be on our handout. We've got a pretty healthy list of things as well. So that's good that it's right at our fingertips there. So then getting back, we talked about the McKinley Street grade separation project. Here again, you see the text defining what is the project and the outcome, really addressing enhanced flow of goods, safety issues, traffic congestion, to help reduce that air and noise pollution. And I mentioned a bit about the improved access for emergency vehicles. So what might look simply like a safety project really covers multiple benefits and topics. Okay, we'll keep going. And on the prior page and on this page, you see some fact sheets. So here's some examples where generally I would say fact sheets are handy to really condense a project idea down to a one-page fact sheet. It might be single side or double side, but what is this project that we're talking about? If you're going to go talk to a council member or a member of the public as well, or simply a grant funding agency, and you want to see broadly what is the description of the project, where is this thing, what is it achieving, that these fact sheets can be a good mechanism to really have that executive summary level summary of details, as well as cost and schedule information. This is always a bit of a moving target. If I created one today, in 3 months, it might need some refinement, but this is a nice way to really have, bring it all together with some colors and graphics. We've definitely seen fact sheets be helpful as federal earmarks have come back into play in the last couple of years, where suddenly an agency calls and says, so-and-so from congressional rep's office is calling and they need all this information about this project, and having that fact sheet available and ready for a project that you're not really sure where you're going to get funding from might be your mechanism to really address those questions, whether it's an earmark or trying to just move it along on, say, council funding of what is the next thing that needs to be done. Or fact sheets to be able to go to your boss and say, hey, there's a grant funding source and it aligns with this opportunity, this fact sheet or this project that we've been talking about. Okay, so with that, I think, where am I? Oh, yes, the ATRC slides. So we've talked a bit about ATRC. Tracy's going to talk about some of the content available and all the information on the website. Tracy.
Yeah, thank you. I'll share my screen. Oh, thanks. Whoops, let's see. How's that? Does it look okay?
Looks good, Tracy.
Yeah.
Great. So hello, everyone. My name is Tracy Cohen, and I assist in managing the Active Transportation Resource Center, the ATRC. I've had the pleasure of being on the ground floor, right, since its inception with the ATRC. And Paul's mentioned some of the resources that we have available, and I want to share those with you. So it's our mission of the ATRC to provide resources, technical assistance, and training to our transportation partners across California with a focus of increasing the opportunity for the successful active transportation projects. We deliver online and classroom trainings, non-infrastructure workshops, technical assistance, and offer other active transportation focused resources for various types of projects. I'm excited to share all that the ATRC has to offer. As I mentioned, resources, guides, technical assistance, as well as training opportunities. And I encourage you to look at this presentation as a guide to these valuable resources that you can utilize and share. You'll find the presentation in the materials portal. I think Dustin shared that with you a couple of times and via email. And these light blue buttons are throughout the presentation are hyperlinked for your convenience to learn more about what we'll be talking about today. Here's our ATRC website guide, where you'll find all the links to the important technical assistance tools, several of our most popular resources, and links to our trainings. If you're new or you just needed a refresher, this is a great place to start. And this slide highlights the resources for the Active Transportation Program, or ATP. You'll find all relevant ATP application trainings, workshops, and webinars here. You'll find project design, training, and training on project implementation. So here are a few more important ATP resources, both infrastructure and non-infrastructure. I want to call to your attention the non-infrastructure, the new important resource on sustainability and how to plan for sustainability in your NI projects and programs. We have updated the e-fact sheets that Paul mentioned just a few moments ago. And you'll find those on our website as well. And remember, the blue button links you to those resources. On infrastructure resources, we have an automated counter loan program. This is a no-cost borrowing program for automated counting equipment to secure count data for your active transportation projects. Simply register your interest in the form located on the automated counter loan program page on the ATRC website. And then lastly, we offer an online bikeway design course. Pardon me. It's a self-paced course that will explain basic principles of planning and share straightforward tools of bikeway design. We offer a live version of this class as well, coming in November 2022, and registration will be found on our website. Here we highlight other important ATP information and web pages outside of the ATRC. One link to Caltrans ATP program, and this provides general information and who to contact. The next web page is just general and technical information. You'll find relevant ATP application documents, attachments, instructions, and guidance. The third web page is the CTC ATP page, and I wanted to specifically point out the reference documents. This section is where you will find policies and guidelines. It's also where you will find the latest information and policy on user counts. The ATRC has a few technical assistance opportunities. You'll see here the kit of parts, evaluation and regional TA programs, and non-infrastructure on-call technical assistance. The first kit of parts is a pilot program. It's new to us here and went in collaboration with California Walks and the Southern California Association of Governments. Go Human project. Our goal is to expand SCAG's existing Go Human kit of parts to statewide usage. The kit contains components of temporary demonstration projects that agencies can use for active transportation pop-up events. Our team will be selecting 3 agencies in California outside of SCAG's region, one from the North, Central, and Southern California. Those agencies will be able to borrow the kit from the ATRC to do the demonstration projects and use them as an opportunity for future active transportation program or other grant application community engagements. The application for this program is open now. We invite you to apply. You'll find the link at the blue button and on the website. The deadline to apply is July 11th at 5 p.m. Another program that bears mentioning is our evaluation and technical assistance program. The objective of this program is to assist local agencies, specifically in disadvantaged communities, in gathering before and after project data for ATP reporting and other project evaluation purposes. We're launching this program very soon, hopefully this summer, and we expect one of the first deliverables to be available this fall. The technical assistance component should launch around winter or early next year. There are 3 phases to this program. The first is an evaluation framework, and our team will develop a performance metric of evaluation plan for ATP, developing a simple plan or framework with different ways to measure success of your project. The second phase will be tailored technical assistance that focuses on data collection and evaluation for the individual projects. And finally, the program will offer data displays and infographics along with project profiles, showcasing your project success, as Paul mentioned earlier. Here's a little more about the evaluation and technical assistance. And then lastly, another technical assistance opportunity we have available is on-call non-infrastructure technical assistance offered through the California Department of Public Health. If you're a non-infrastructure implementer or developer, or developing a non-infrastructure application, and you have specific questions about program development or need other related information to your project, you can reach out to CDPH. You'll find these contacts here. So I'll just close today with upcoming training opportunities. We have a webinar and teleconference series called On the Move, and they deliver interesting and timely topics related to active transportation. I mentioned the virtual bicycle planning and design course coming up in November. And lastly, the crossing guard training. We're excited to get this to you. We will be opening registration tentatively. I don't know if we'll make it for July now, but for August and September for sure. And lastly, this is how you can reach our general contacts in our office. So please note, it's not everything. And if you need to reach out to your district representative, your DLAE, your active transportation representative in your district, you can find them here. And lastly, we ask you to share the ATRC. Three ways you can help us spread awareness is to share this resource presentation with a colleague and encourage a colleague to sign up for the mailing list, or share a valuable resource from our website to your network.
Awesome.
Thank you. So Paul, I don't know. I know that Amber or Amanda, pardon me, Amanda shared the website. Do we have time to do that, or?
Sorry, it cut out a little. What'd you say, Tracy?
That's all right. I think we shared the website earlier. I don't know if that's essential. I wasn't watching the time.
It's 11:10. If you wanted to pull the website up, that's fine. We've got time.
Okay, let's see. So just a quick walk around. We'll see our homepage. I do want to highlight here at the bottom to sign me up. So joining our mailing list will ensure that you get pertinent information about all the resources and trainings I talked about today. Our training pages here, we talked about on the move, our classroom and online trainings available to you. Our resources for infrastructure and non-infrastructure. Here you'll find a list of, we call them the 6 E's. I think Paul mentioned 5 E's. A valuable resource there. And we have project profiles and success stories of other active transportation projects. And then finally here in technical assistance, a little bit about the counter loan program. Right here in the middle of the page, you'll find the interest form to register your interest on borrowing the equipment. So I know it's a quick run through, pardon me, on the website. So I think that will be all for me.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I know that program to loan out equipment, LA County has done that in the past too. I don't know if other jurisdictions throughout the state have the same type of thing, but we've seen different agencies not always have the best resources for data collection, and it's nice when some county or regional agency is able to purchase that equipment for the data collection and then loan it out. That requires some staff time to orchestrate, but can help overcome some of those challenges.
Right. And I know that's a vision, right, of the ATRC is, so you can borrow the equipment at no cost, but I think on down the line, what we'd like to do is sometimes that's a big lift, right? To deploy the equipment, secure the data, and then process it in a way that it can be presented. So I think that's some additional technical assistance we're looking into for the future.
So if anyone's interested, of course, talk to ATRC and you can work through some of those details, be able to collect some data about traffic. So people in motor vehicles or walking and cycling to be able to get some of that data that can help with your next application.
Yeah.
All right, well then we'll keep going. So then we've got another module that we want to talk about. I've mentioned some terminology, disadvantaged communities or underserved communities, and how that is done. So we want to start with the poll. Is the community that you work in designated as disadvantaged? Yes, no, maybe some degree, or I don't know. And I start here with the question before we've defined it, before we've gone into the details. Just go ahead and take your best answer, stab at answering it, and then we'll walk through what the state and the federal government have identified as ways to identify those underserved communities.
Yeah, I will just jump in here quick, Paul, is that within the Bay Area, MTC, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission refers to it as equity priority communities. If you are in the Bay Area and have heard that terminology before, that is the same as underserved communities.
It's definitely a lot of different terms out there: disadvantaged, underserved, equity priority. Let's see, so then, yeah. So then in the chat, there's a bit of a discussion about income levels, maybe using that as a mechanism. So we'll get into that. That's a good prompt there. Thank you. And then, so I see the poll results. Let's see, so we're seeing yes answered by about 30% of the participants, 18% said no, and then 47% say some. So we do see that it's pretty common, of course, for different agencies to have some degree, some areas of their jurisdiction may be designated as disadvantaged, and then some saying, I'm not sure. All right, so we'll walk through it a little as we go to the next slide. Talk about what are those ways to really define or identify if the community is underserved. So on the left, on the state side, we see a few different categories. So income is just that second one on the list, but there was Senate Bill 535 that identified a process to develop a GIS-based analysis for disadvantaged communities, DACs, using this GIS tool called Cal EnviroScreen. So I'll show that a little more on the next slide. So the Cal EnviroScreen is GIS based. The second one is based on income strictly. Then the third one is free and reduced price meals. So at schools where 75% or more of the students are eligible for some reduced price meals, then that school and the surrounding area can be identified as disadvantaged. And then there's another criteria, the Healthy Places Index. So this is a GIS-based analysis that evaluates health indicators and has broken up the state into different quartiles. So there's a percentage score based on that, and the places with the worst index essentially can be identified as underserved or disadvantaged. And then within different regions, there might be another sub-regional definition. So I'm in Southern California, so SCAG, the Southern California Association of Governments, has some defined categories as well that are above and beyond what's in the state definition. So wherever your region is, you might have a regional definition as well. And then the federal side, the terminology is a little different, but they also have some criteria. So the areas of persistent poverty or historically disadvantaged communities. A lot of what I'm talking about is GIS based. So in the subsequent pages, we have some graphics and images that you'll see, and we can show that with some examples on the screen. All right, go ahead, Ryan.
Paul, there's a question in the chat about, CDBG areas and if they qualify for counting as a disadvantaged community. So my understanding is CDBG is it does a low and medium household incomes. And so it is still income based, but as a subset itself, I have not seen CDBG areas be eligible on their own. It would still need to be sliced based on income levels specifically for those census tracts.
Thanks, Ryan. So the first state designation that I had put on the screen there on the prior one was the Senate Bill 535, and it identified this mapping tool, the Cal EnviroScreen. So the language said to analyze environmental, public health, and socioeconomic conditions in various census tracts to get a picture of the cumulative pollution burdens and vulnerabilities throughout the state. So this, as I mentioned, it's a GIS, a geographic information system, composite scoring based on multiple indicators, 21 in total. and it provides a relative score, track versus track, census tract throughout the state, and the top quartile, the highest 25% areas satisfy essentially the Cal virus screen and can be identified as disadvantaged. And with that, the state, the report documenting it saying Cal virus screen version 4.0 identifies the top quartile as roughly 24% of the state population. Okay, so the 21 indicators are shown on the screen. I apologize, the resolution looks a little fuzzy for me too, but you see a variety of things such as environmental indicators, air, water, pesticides, for example. If you're in proximity to some hazardous waste site or impaired water bodies, as well as socioeconomic information about the health of the community and the population, as well as these other socioeconomic categories, the language barriers or unemployment and housing. Collectively, all these have some sort of weighting, and this aggregated GIS develops that Cal virus screen score. Okay. Next slide. So then I want to go through a demonstration. So I'll do screen share on my end, showing this website that's on, let's see, you know what, Dustin, oh, there. I think I'm good. All right, Ryan, can you see the website with the Cal virus screen?
Yes, I do.
Okay, thanks. So on the prior page, we had a link that just showed a screenshot of what's on the screen here. So this Cal virus screen 4.0, we're at version 4.0. On the prior grant application for ATP, we are on version 3.0. So maybe in a couple of years, this will get updated as well. So this is evolving over time, but this online portal from the, let me make this a little bigger. The Office of Environmental and Health Hazard Assessment handles developing this GIS analysis. And so I scroll down, it's got the mapping tools and the actual image on the right. So let me work on this. Zoom back out. So if I wanted to go into this and really, take a look at the map and say, okay, well, I want to look at a place in particular. So say I'll just do Fresno, let it populate, and then it zooms in specifically to Fresno. So you see little gray lines are showing up on the screen for the census tracts, and I've zoomed in real tight. You see a lot of red here. So the frame on the left shows the scoring. So you get a green to red scoring for the Cal virus screen. Red is the highest quartile, essentially a highest score. If I click anywhere on the screen, left click, then a little dialog box shows up. You see the actual census tract. You see the population within there, what their Cal virus screen score is. This one is 98 out of 100. So this would definitely be identified as a disadvantaged community. There's various indicators for each category or scoring for the indicators. So you can really go through and look at the detail, but in general, we just talk about it. It's Cal virus screen 98, for example. If I zoom back out and pan to another area, say in this yellow area over here, the Cal virus screen score is 58. So on this map, you can look at your community and get a good sense on this specific category, the Cal virus screen, what the scores are, and really the recent ATP application essentially indicated we want you to go and use this map and simply take a screenshot of the scoring so that you can more easily convey that if you are going to talk about Cal virus screen score, how the project falls within or benefits disadvantaged communities. So there's a lot more info here. Of course, there's the explanation of how to read the information and view it. And this link that's shown on the screen is provided on our handout. So for anyone that's trying to understand at least this category, the Cal virus screen score, then you can go to that website and get up to speed. Any questions there? See you in the chat. Someone noted the Cal virus screen resolution is a bit coarse for rural applications. So yes, so then right now I'm talking about census tract, but then you could get to a finer grade location like census block. So maybe that's applicable. I've zoomed into Fresno, but you certainly see like some areas. If I just click on whatever this area is, I mean, this is in the mountains, northeast of Fresno. It's a large geographic area. So you might have a project that is more tighter area, even if you look at the rest of the valley, this tract to the west, it's a big geographic area. So you might start to look at a finer grid instead of the census tract, maybe the census block. It doesn't show on this page specifically, but you can get into that tighter level if needed. Okay. All right. So Ryan, I'll turn off the screen share on my end. Let's see. And then let's get back to the PowerPoint. Thank you. All right. So then as I move on, I wanted to highlight the federal categories as well. So this one, we mentioned that this is a screenshot showing both areas of persistent poverty in historically disadvantaged communities. The federal government has provided, again, a GIS portal online that is on our handouts. Here on the screen, you see this example from Sacramento where the project, the Gold Line Modernization Project, was identified, and you see the where both of these categories are being benefited by the project. So this would have been relevant for some sort of federal grant application, for example. Okay. And then I wanted to go through an example. So we worked with the city of Anaheim recently to evaluate various disadvantaged community criteria. So I mentioned there's a few different ones. Cal Enviro Screen is just one of them. And those other ones like household income or healthy places index. So here you see a map that is replicated for the different criteria. In this circumstance, the city of Anaheim was looking at improving uncontrolled crosswalks. So these are crosswalks that don't have the benefit of a traffic signal. They might be a mid-block location or a minor street intersection, like a T intersection near a park or a school. They've got multiple locations shown in the yellow dots here. So it helped the city to really say, okay, well, how do we score relative to the various criteria for disadvantaged communities? And then which one then would be the best mechanism for us to evaluate and propose in our grant application? So the red coloring shows the Cal Enviro Screen 4.0, that top quartile. But then on the next page, you see a different criteria. This is household income. And the color of fill based on the census tracts starts to vary. So this one on the screen is relative to your household income if you're below that 60,000 number. And then the next map shows, in this case, the free and reduced price meals. So the yellow dots again are study locations, and then the purple dots showing the schools nearby that qualify. And the way that the grant application guidelines are written in this case, you get a benefit 2 miles within a radius of that school that satisfies that criteria. So there's a lot of overlap in that 2 mile radius. So effectively the western edge of the city satisfies that free and reduced price meals pretty comprehensively. So there is a bit of a qualifier on using this category that you might talk about this benefit to students as long as your project is really achieving a benefit to students traveling to and from schools. So not every project simply is going to always have that nexus. Okay, let's see a question. If you use Cal Enviro Screen or HPI data for any grant applications besides ATP. So definitely I know with the Caltrans Sustainable Transportation Planning grants, for example, there's a lot of questions about the benefit to disadvantaged communities. So some of this information is relevant, of course, to the ATP, but it may also apply to others. Ryan, I think you've had it with some of the grants that you've been doing as well lately.
Yeah, I have used both of those as well as the low income category for the other state SB1 grants. as well as I've included them in federal grants where I've referenced the HPI data. It's really good source to pull from to demonstrate, if you want to say that a community really needs walking and biking facilities, well, you can pull from the HPI just, how much the community is reliant on active travel modes versus vehicle ownership.
We're definitely seeing one of the themes, of course, that Ryan and I talked through is alignment with state policies. And we definitely are seeing a lot of these grant programs really saying, well, what is the benefit to underserved communities, whether it's the state or the federal level, having that policy. So definitely all these disadvantaged community criteria are going to be relevant for a variety of funding. The next map shows I think the Healthy Places Index. So here you see the purple, and it doesn't show as much for the city. So the reason I'm walking through these is the city, in this case, had to select one of these criteria to then say, we'd like grant funding to improve these uncontrolled crosswalks, and then better strategically decide which disadvantage criteria they would use for their grant application. They could still say, we satisfy all these other ones, or look how there's a lot of variation, but there's not always a single answer. The next slide goes through the regional definition. In this case, SCAG has an identification of environmental justice areas based on their own criteria and information, and that provides pretty healthy coverage throughout the city. Keep going, Ryan. Here we see all the results in a table. So there's the 5 maps that we saw are each of the rows here, and you see with the study locations, there's roughly 40 locations. How many fall directly within any of those filled areas or are nearby? So you can do a bit of a game to say, like, what is our best approach strategically in the grant application to be able to lobby for how improving these uncontrolled crosswalks near schools and parks is going to benefit the community and serve those underserved communities, improve the conditions. So with that, we want to ask a poll question on the next one and say, okay, based on all the information that I just went through this case study, which criteria would you select? You don't have the maps, but here you do see the table with the results of how many of those dots fall within the study area or the designated areas or are nearby. We'll give it a second here for everyone to populate the poll. And then when we get close to the high percentage there, Ryan will go ahead and do the sharing. We did work on a variety of ATP applications for local jurisdictions. This was a bit more of an exercise, at least for us on the Mark Thomas side, of just helping the agency think through this specific item, but also then providing some recommendations about the countermeasures. And then the city did the final submittal. So here the feedback from the group is 50%, a high percentage there, half of the group thinking use the SCAG EJ area, which was identified there. And then HPI, of course, didn't seem to show all that great. And then a mixture of the others, the Cal Virus Green, household income, and FRPM, the reduced price meals. In this case, we did see an excess. I didn't go through all the variety of locations, but a lot of the project locations actually happen to serve schools and school travel. So in that case, we actually recommended to the agency that they go ahead and use the free and reduced price meals category. And we've been a little hesitant on our side to suggest the regional definition. We're a little still hesitant and concerned that on a statewide level, that reviewers in some other place might discount or may not know that there's good credibility with the regional definition. So it certainly can be used and it's eligible, but at times we've still kind of tried to look and see like, is some of the other criteria going to work in case you get someone that's reviewing and they're not sure about like whether they really are fans of the regional definition, if that makes sense. All right, so with that, we'll keep going. Go through the funding need.
So for our last module today, I'm going to go through how we determine the funding need for a project. Why you want to know this, why you want to determine that need, right? You got to have a firm grasp on the project costs and what you currently have for funding. What phases will you need funding for in the future, and what's that project schedule? And then lastly, identifying that remaining need, right? What is that last piece of dollars that you need to either, move forward with final design or to implement construction, as an example. So first is understanding the current project phase. So where are you? Are you in PNED, or did you just complete PS&E? Are you going into right of way? Do you need to go into construction coming up? What are those? And then what's your current project schedule, right? And it's important to understand that because each grant can have different requirements regarding project funding allocation and expenditure dates, right? When you need to have all the money expended. So we have here on the screen is just an example of a simple schedule bar chart from a grant application stating, hey, look, we went through the project report, or PRE, project report equivalent, and the CEQA NEPA documentation. And there's been a little delay in the project, but we're ready to move forward and are requesting PS&E and final design dollars. And in the purple box, you have this, importance of knowing the allocation and expenditure dates. And I provide here a couple examples. So for the Highway Safety Improvement Program, there you get 3 to 3.5 years from when you ask for your PE, or project engineering authorization, to when you need to reach construction, right? HSIP is intended to be delivered quickly. For the local partnership program, you have 3 years to complete construction. So if you're going to ask for funding in the environmental phase, you need to know you got to get through to construction in 3 years. And this last one here for the RAISE grant program is they had an obligation date of when you needed to request those funds and when you needed to have those funds expended, or that account liquidated. So those are things that you got to keep in mind, that when you're asking for that obligation, or you're going to go request a certain phase of funding, that you understand each of those individual grant criteria or requirements. And they're all written within either the guidelines for state programs that the CTC, or California Transportation Commission, administers, or within the NOFO, the Notice of Funding Opportunity. And here quickly, and Paul, maybe you can help me here within the chat, a link to the SCAG EJ areas map. If you get a chance to put that in the chat, that would be great. And next here is identifying your current phase, all right, or your current funding, excuse me. So here is an example from a project down in Stanislaus County for the replacement of the 7th Street Bridge. It's a rather high cost historic bridge over the Tuolumne River. And what we were asked to do here for the agency is to look at the funding across all the project phases, was what you see in the table, and then look at what's currently available to the project. What are those matching funds? What is the flexibility of those funds, right? So this project is primarily funded through the Highway Bridge Program, HBP, and they have matching funds either, through the county, which has some Measure L, their local transportation sales tax dollars, and then the city, because the project is also within the city of Modesto, so they are contributing funds. And then they also have some CMAQ money for items that are not eligible through the Highway Bridge Program. So we took a look at this in order to identify funding opportunities where we could shift around local monies and be able to fully fund the project and lessen the burden for the local agency. When we're, this is just another example for determining the funding need. Here is a project within Santa Cruz County where we identified with the agency a $10 million funding gap. And you can see in the table, based on all the project phases and funding types, right? They have some local measure money, they're Measure D. They have state-only STIP funds, so they have the Regional Improvement Program funds. They have some Surface Transportation Program exchange funds. So for some parts of the state, you can exchange your federal surface transportation funds for state dollars. And then they also they were successful and brought in 2 state grants from the local partnership program and the Solutions for Congested Corridors program. Over this 79, almost $80 million project, we identified a $10 million gap within the construction capital phase that the agency is actively looking to close with federal grant sources. One other item that we do often now when we're helping agencies deliver large infrastructure projects is developing a funding plan that is that can be updated frequently based on upcoming grant opportunities or when grant funds are secured, etc. And I just want to provide this example from the city of Los Banos. I talked previously about the Pioneer Road Improvement Project. So this is a 6.5 mile complete street corridor that connects around the southern portion of the community. And the total project cost is over $78 million, but they had seed money of $8.65 million from their Measure V. And what the agency wanted to do was, how could we help them and work with their regional agency, MCAG, Merced County Association of Governments, to turn that $8.65 million in local monies, match monies, and bring in additional funds from state and federal sources. And here's just a quick image so you can, just to provide the background here to understand the breadth of this project and its length and everything that entails. So it's a pretty substantial project for a community like the city of Los Banos. We went through and analyzed multiple funding sources, identified potential upcoming sources, identified what we had in hand that we had discussions with the local or with MCAG about. And what we show here in this chart is exactly what those dollars are that we have, and the green column shows those monies that we had in hand, which were from the Measure V program, as well as their regional development impact fee, which is the RTIF. And then there's some highway improvement program monies that was underneath the previous federal transportation bill. That program was created. It no longer exists under the IIJA, excuse me. And then you can see highlighted in red are these 2 areas of unmet need, right? So we understand now, here's what we're looking for. We need about $50 million still in order to deliver this project, but we've slowly been working away at the funding for the project and breaking the project into individual phases for delivery. And that's what we have here. So MCAG last summer had a call for CMAQ projects, and we worked with them and the city to identify a first phase intersection that we could move forward and capture the CMAQ funds. So this is that first phase intersection at Ortiga-Lita. It's the busiest intersection along the alignment that is not a state route. And we turned that Measure V money into the CMAQ award of 1.5 million. Then from that, we were able to grab the CRISA, which you see there. So that was the Coronavirus Recovery Act funds that came through. And then we picked up additional HIP funds, so Highway Improvement Program funds. So we were able to take this, in this instance, the small amount of Measure V money, and working with the regional agency and the city, and be able to cobble together a well-rounded funding plan for the project. And we're working on additional early action phases for this project to take advantage of upcoming funding opportunities, right? And as we go through this process and additional funds are secured, we're updating the funding plan. In fact, I just did it last week to demonstrate, okay, well, here we are, we chipped away this much of the funding plan, and that gap then went from 50 million, now it's down to 45 million, right? So we're slowly chipping away and taking this, what could be seen as, a very daunting task of a $78 million project, and only having, $8 million of that, and have been able to take that local money and really bring in some additional funds and slowly chip away at the project. And lastly, the one thing that we do always preach when it comes to understanding your project and requesting grant funds is accurate cost estimates. This really is so important. I was on the phone earlier this week with a regional agency that was telling their local member jurisdictions the exact same thing, that when you're going through, and we just went through this big process of ATP applications, if you had a project already in development, make sure that your cost estimate is up to date and accurate, so you're able to capture the additional funds, because these grants will not cover additional project shortfalls, right? So if you requested $10 million in construction funds, but come to find out that project is now 15 million in construction, you as the local agency are on the hook for $5 million, which you may not have seen coming when you were preparing the grant application. So it's really important to get those costs up to date, and don't forget about these couple of really important items. One are the utilities and your utility relocations. Make sure that you have included that information into your project costs. Your underground drainage systems, we see that as an area where costs come up short. So make sure that if you're using a percentage of construction costs, that you have a high enough percentage to cover what may happen. Or making sure that you just include, if you're upsizing storm drain or replacing DIs, that information, that you have it included, that you have good right-of-way estimates, right? So if you're requesting right-of-way dollars, you're requesting enough funding to acquire properties. And lastly, permitting, right? That you understand what those permitting costs are going to be for the project, and make sure to include appropriate contingencies. The ATP, you could get that contingency in there, 20%, or so. With the HSIP program, they restrict it to 10%. But making sure that you have that contingency and your unit costs are sufficient to provide you cover when you go into construction, 3 years down the road, 4 years down the road in some instances. And this chart here is just it demonstrates the complexity and the increased costs with the project, right? If you're coming in and your project isn't to install on-street bike lanes, well, that's a pretty low cost. It doesn't have a lot of impacts outside of the curb face. But once you move forward to doing a class 1 trail, roadway widenings, new roadways, interchange projects, etc., you jump into your utilities that you're dealing with, the relocations of, you've got right-of-way, environmental requirements, and permitting, to make sure you understand that complexity and account for it within your project cost estimate. And that was our last slide for today's presentation. And yeah, I don't know, Paul, if you have anything else you want to add here at the end, but thank you all for staying with us today. There was a lot of information. If you have any questions today that didn't get asked or you want answered, please feel free to put them into the chat. And then we do also have a survey that was just dropped into the chat. So please fill that out and let us know how we did and what you think, because that will really help Paul and I as we move forward here with additional trainings to be able to make sure we're meeting the needs of the students.
Ryan, the next 2 slides is a recap real quick of what we went through today. So everyone saw all this, but then as a little teaser, again, you want to go to the next slide. It shows the topics that we'll cover tomorrow. So matching with your project with the funding and community engagement, how that dialogue with the funding agencies can benefit you in advance. And the storytelling, we talk a bit about that as how do we really write a narrative that addresses, really lines up and is customized for the grant. And then working on those things like graphics and letters of support that can really put a bow on it. And then understanding the political trends and policies and all the various things that are popping up that are not, say, transportation solely, but there's a nexus and a relationship that's very important. So I think those are my big things. Of course, again, we're available for the chat. Yeah, so there's a little bit of questions. So Dustin has been recording this. So Dustin, I think you could chime in about where the recording becomes available once it's finished.
I'm gonna have to double check on where that goes. I have not done that part of production for us. I think it gets sent out automatically, but I will have to double check. But I will make sure I find out before our meeting tomorrow.
That's great. And we've talked a lot about the materials, the PowerPoint slides. There's a PDF version of that, a handout as well, and various links in that. These additional things, even the dictated notes, the transcription, I guess I would call it, of whatever the text was today. So we're certainly available for chat, but our questions, but we're always happy to finish early and give everyone back a little bit of time. If anyone's got any questions or items, feel free to enter that into the chat now. We can help address it. Otherwise, yeah, we are finished up and we'll see everyone at 8:30 tomorrow morning. And please fill out the survey for today's input so we can evaluate how we did today. Thanks. was dropping off, certainly.
Yeah,
No additional questions. We answered them as we went.
that's right.
Thanks, Eva. All right, I'm gonna drop off.
Yeah, likewise.
We'll see everyone tomorrow.
Yes.
Thank you, Dustin.
All right, thank you,
Yep.
Dustin.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.